and welcome. I was going to present today a bit of Vedic astrology or Jyotish information for major transits that are happening currently in the month of April 2022. And if you're not familiar with Vedic astrology, it's a bit different from Western astrology, so some of the dates and things may be a bit different, but it should be still be helpful for you. So this slide shows all, not even all actually, just the major transits. And by major transits in Vedic astrology, we mostly look at the slow-moving planets when things are really going to change, because the slow-moving planets, they only change signs every year, every year and a half, or every 2.5 years. And so they create kind of a foundation or kind of a container, kind of a board, sort of a board game and rules of the board game for a bit of time. So they're kind of longer cycles. And so you can see from this little timeline here, and again, I'm only putting in the major shifts. There's quite a lot going on from really April. Well, it kind of started a little bit. We're at, what, April 13th now? So it started, the planets started shifting into their last degree beginning in March of 2000, March 24th, and that's going to be going on actually for a good 2 months until really May 25th. So let me go through each of the slow-moving planets and when they're moving and how these movements can potentially affect things. So the first planets, actually they're called shadow planets, Rahu and Ketu. These are the nodes of the moon. And they're going, or they went Sunday on March 24th. So Sunday means that they're in the last degree of a sign, or the first degree of a sign. And when a planet is in the first or last degree of a sign, it's got this inherent instability. So it may be that since March 24th, you've been, some odd things have been going on or unexpected things, because Rahu and Ketu are shadow planets, or sometimes they're considered veiled planets. They're not really straightforward. You can't always see what's coming. So when things kind of happen out of the blue, or you have unexpected events, a lot of times that can be Rahu and Ketu energy. So Rahu and Ketu have been it's been pretty unstable since March 24th, and yesterday, April 12th, they shifted signs. So they were in Taurus and Scorpio, and now they're in Aries and Libra. So the thing though is that Rahu and Ketu are, when they're in Taurus, they're debilitated, and when they're in Scorpio, they're exalted. So what that means is that these planets had sort of an extra strength to them, or actually an extra weakness. In either case, they were exaggerated. So Rahu and Ketu can symbolize things such as pandemics. So this probably isn't much of a surprise. It can symbolize things such as mental health and illness. And it can symbolize things like occult knowledge or spiritual knowledge, psychic knowledge, that sort of thing. But again, there's sort of wild cards, really. You never quite know what to expect, so you kind of have to expect the unexpected. So now that they've moved into Aries and Libra, their energy should be toned down a little bit. The thing though is that they are also in a yoga formation. A yoga formation is a certain sort of pattern of planets, and they happen to be in what's called a Kala Sarpa Yoga. They've been in the Kala Sarpa Yoga for a while, and what that means is Rahu and Ketu are exactly 180 degrees from each other. They kind of form an axis, and when all the other planets, the other 7 planets, are on one side or the other, that's considered a Kala Sarpa Yoga. And that type of yoga is also an exaggerates Rahu and Ketu energy. And Rahu and Ketu energy can be sudden, shifts. It can be like in weather patterns or storms or shifting of tectonic plates. Um, Rahu also tends to symbolize a lot of ambition. So if Rahu was in Taurus, it was debilitated. So it wasn't. It was, in a sign of weakness, and it was exaggerated. So there was probably, you may have been feeling like all this kind of pent up energy to do something, and no real good channel to put that in. Sometimes, Rahu and Ketu can also symbolize things like addictions or drug use or sort of generally checking out. Again, a loss of consciousness. So you might have been experiencing some of that on some level. Um, and again, this depends on where your own Rahu and Ketu sit in your natal chart. So if they're well positioned, then maybe your addiction was just a lot of Netflix binging over the last year and a half, because these planets only shift signs every year and a half. Or it could be if they've got other malefic planet energy conjoined or aspecting them. It could be more serious addiction, like we've been seeing in the opioid crisis, unfortunately getting worse, at least in the United States. Good news is coming though. So again, Rahu and Ketu have shifted in signs where they're not exaggerated, they're not debilitated or exalted. So their energy is going to calm down a bit. And also this Kala Sarpa yoga pattern is breaking, Mercury's breaking it on April 24th. The thing though is that, there's still a few, it's still going to be a little bit of a bumpy ride, because Rahu and Ketu are responsible for forming eclipses. We're going to have a partial solar eclipse on April 30th at 16:27 Eastern Standard Time. The solar eclipse is going to be seen mostly in South America. And because the solar eclipse is actually going to be aspected by Saturn, and Saturn represents things of the earth, it could very well be that there could be something like an earthquake happening in South America. So again, expect the unexpected. And the shadow period for eclipses starts about 2 weeks before the solar eclipse. So right about now is when you're going to start seeing the shadow of the solar eclipse. I find during this time, when the shadow of the eclipse starts forming, I literally journal every day and take notes. And every day something unexpected happens. And it could be it just sort of like, you just like, wow, I didn't even sort of realize that that could happen. You just sort of realize that you have a negative expectation or even a positive expectation. But just, odd things can kind of happen that are out of the norm. Like one time I was walking in a cemetery across the street from my house. And again, this was right around the time of an eclipse. And the cemetery is normally fairly quiet and people are nice and they talk a little bit, but it's a fairly quiet, serene place. And right around the eclipse, there was this like long parade of motorcyclists just going through the cemetery. I guess one of their friends had passed, another motorcyclist, but they didn't go through with this sort of like serene or somber kind of mood that I mostly see in cemeteries. No, they were whooping it up. They were like, "Yeah, woo!" Like it was a big party, and it just sort of shook me a little bit, because again, it was sort of, on some level, I had some expectation of how people typically act in a cemetery or during a ceremony, and it was again a little bit out of the norm, not good or bad, but just kind of, again, just sort of made you realize, like, oh, I didn't realize I had these expectations. So Rahu and Ketu can definitely do that. So the partial solar eclipse is coming at the end of the month, and that same day, Rahu and Ketu are leaving Sundi. So again, this place of debilitation wherein they're in the first or last degree of the sign. So again, that can cause some more instability with the solar eclipse again. So, but again, it's moving with moving out of Kalasarpa yoga and moving out of Sandhi, Rahu and Ketu should calm down a bit. But that's just their nature, is they're kind of, expect the unexpected. And then we have a total lunar eclipse. Again, eclipses always come in pairs and sometimes threes. So we have a total lunar eclipse that's happening on May 16th at 12:14 in the morning Eastern Standard Time. So, and then we're going to have the shadow period 2 weeks after that. So again, we have a few weeks still of exaggerated K2, Rahu K2 energy that should be slowly winding down with another extra push right around May 16th. So that's Rahu and Ketu. And again, Rahu and Ketu only change signs every year and a half. So I would expect with this movement that we should see, hopefully, since these planets are getting out of exaggerated condition, that hopefully things with the pandemic will hopefully wind down a bit, although I don't think we're completely out of the woods, and that's because of Saturn, which I'll get into. For Saturn, let's talk about Jupiter, because Jupiter is another slow-moving planet. Jupiter only changes signs every year or so. Jupiter is actually moving into a sign of its own house, which means by being in its own house, it's going to be very strong. And luckily, Jupiter is considered the great benefic. The thing though is that if Jupiter is the lord of one of your negative houses, again, this is in your natal birth chart. So if it's a lord of your houses 6, 8, or 12, there may be issues with Jupiter. If Jupiter is debilitated or combust, these are ways that Jupiter can be weaker in your chart. Or if Jupiter happens to be a Badhaka lord, which means the lord of a house that can actually kind of symbolize or represent kind of the saboteur. We all have a saboteur in our lives. It can also represent a Chidra Graha. A Chidra Graha is a Graha that's like they usually call it like piercing. It has that kind of energy, and it can be a point of weakness, especially if you're doing any kind of medical astrology. Chidra Grahas can sometimes symbolize, or often symbolize, a weakness related to parts of the body that Jupiter itself as a planet represents, or the houses that Jupiter represents, and the body parts they represent. In any case, Jupiter is the great benefic. So even if Jupiter has some negative connotations because of its placement or condition in your birth chart, it's still the great benefic. So even if some what we would normally consider an unfortunate thing happens, like you lose a job or there's a breakup in a relationship, there will still be something good that comes out of it, because again, Jupiter as a benefic in its own house, in a position of strength, is going to cushion the blow. There's going to be a silver lining, and it's also a planet of spirituality and also justice. So again, even if some event that you'd rather not happen happens, when Jupiter's involved, it's usually not quite so bad. So there's usually something good to come out of it. And what's also nice is that Venus is going to be joining Jupiter. Venus is also another benefic planet. These two are going to be traveling together. Actually, Jupiter just switched signs today. So Venus was with Jupiter, so that was lending a hand. And actually, Venus is going to be rejoining Jupiter from April 27th to May 22nd. And that's going to be fantastic in some aspects of life, because Jupiter is going to be in its own sign. It's going to be very strong. And Venus is exalted in Pisces. So Venus is also going to be very strong. So you're going to have like these two benefic planets in really good shape. Although at the end of that time, May 22nd, there's going to be a moment when they're going to be in planetary war. And so they're going to be a little bit weak at that point because of the planetary war. Planetary war happens when planets, true planets, are within 1 degree of each other. And so there's going to be a little bit there, but it's going to be more of a pillow fight, more than like, you know, dirty drag out, no rules MMA type stuff. In any case, Jupiter went Sunday, so it started getting into a weaker position because it was leaving its last degree of Aquarius, and that started April 8th. Today, Jupiter's transiting into Pisces, so it's slowly going to get stronger. And then on April 17th, so just, a few days out, Jupiter's leaving Sunday. So this kind of inherent instability that happens when a planet crosses into another sign. So that should be really great. For the next year, all that Jupiterian energy is going to be aspecting the water signs, so Cancer and Scorpio and Pisces. So I would imagine that there's going to be, just a higher level of emotional fulfillment, gratitude, um, and spiritualization. So maybe over the last, especially a couple of years with the pandemic, so much has gone on. It's really kind of torn at people's lives in different ways. But I think Jupiter's going to bring in optimism. It's going to bring in it's going to kind of bring in this energy of like, even though things were turned upside down by the pandemic, like there was good that came out of it. And so we might start to see some of that good that came out of it, especially on the emotional level. So that's Jupiter. So Jupiter, again, it's going to be moving into its own house. So it's going to be strong, and it's going to be shining a lot of positive energy in at least 4 of the 12 houses of the chart. So there's some areas of life that are going to be quite nice and running smoother. So the third slow-moving planet is Saturn. Saturn only changes signs every 2.5 years. It's the slowest moving planet in classical Vedic astrology. Classical Vedic astrology doesn't use Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto. More modern kind of Jyotish people use them. I don't at this time. Who knows? That may change. But Saturn, so today's April 13th at the time of this recording, Saturn is going Sunday. So it's moving into its last degree of Capricorn, its own sign, tomorrow. And it's going to be entering Aquarius on April 28th, which is another sign that it owns. So Saturn is going to, has been strong the last 2.5 years, and it will continue to be strong over the next 2.5 years. And it's going to be leaving Sunday, so it's going to be leaving the first degree of Aquarius on May 25th. So until May 25th, it's going to be a bit unstable. And Saturn is actually the planet of stability. It's the planet of structure. It's a planet of antiquity. It represents things like things of old, historic things, architecture, the earth, mining and things in the ground. So that's actually probably why, actually right about the time that Saturn started going Sunday, is when we started having all these problems with like gas and petroleum and that sort of thing. Because, things in the ground, it represents things in the ground, and all that became unstable with the war going on between Ukraine and Russia. So Saturn will be stabilizing a little bit, but don't get too excited about that in a way, because on July 12th, Saturn is going to retrograde back and re-enter Capricorn. So basically for June and part of July, so six-ish weeks, Saturn is going to step into Aquarius, but it's going to step right back. And so Saturn is going to be a bit unstable just because it's doing this sort of two-step. And the thing is, Saturn is going to re-enter Aquarius in January of 2023. January 17th, and it's going to move into Aquarius and stay in Aquarius for a good 2.5 years. So that's when Saturn's really going to be stable. So Saturn, again, it's a slow-moving planet, and if you happen to be in Sati, Sati is a period when Saturn shows up in the sign before the placement of your moon and goes through the sign of your moon and then goes through the sign after your moon. So since Saturn moves through each sign for 2.5 years, the sign before, of, and after your moon is in total 7.5 years. That's called Sati. And again, that's a time when there's a great restructuring in life. So if you happen to be if your moon happens to be in Sagittarius, you're going to be leaving Sati, and there should be this great replenishment of a whole new kind of, almost like spring in your life happening. Because typically during the Sati period, again, you end up losing old structures in your life that were created typically in the 30 years before, because it takes about 29.5 years for Saturn to go through the whole zodiac. So Saturn's cycle is about 29 to 30 years. And so you might find that you've lost friends or networks or positions or education or any kind of support system that you might have set up 29 or 30 years ago. So Saturn, again, but that's the thing, is Saturn owns Capricorn, it's in its own sign, and Saturn is in Aquarius, so it's in its own sign. The difference between the two, though, is Capricorn is an earth sign. So Capricorn is a very earthy, pragmatic planet. It's very much nuts and bolts. It's very much about how do we make this concrete? How do we make this work in the real world on the ground level? Aquarius, though, is an air sign. So Saturn is going to be moving from an earth sign and air sign. An air sign represents thoughts and imagination and, kind of reimagining things. So, especially after, Saturn has really knocked out a lot of very concrete things in our lives. I mean, it's uprooted jobs, it's uprooted homes, it's uprooted families, it's uprooted, schools and routines and all this sort of thing. Once Saturn finally moves into Aquarius for good in January, I think that's when we're really going to be seeing how do we really reimagine our lives? How do we create, kind of a new foundation mentally? Because by creating a new foundation mentally, then when you put the plans down, when you lay the blueprints down, that's when, then afterwards comes the, let's pour the concrete. So again, yeah, I mean, luckily Rahu and Ketu, just shifted signs yesterday, and Jupiter just shifted today. So in the coming weeks, at the beginning to middle of May, there should be more stability, but it's not going to be entirely stable until January of 2023. So especially right now, with these big transits going on, this isn't really the best time to invest in something that's going to be long term. Uh, at least till the beginning of May, once Saturn has also shifted signs into Aquarius. But again, Saturn's going to shift back. So beginning of May, middle of May to middle of July. If there's some new thing that you're wanting to create that you want to last for a long time, you could look at things then. And then again, when Saturn goes back into Capricorn from July to January, there's going to be a little bit more. There's going to be a little bit more to release and let go of and restructure the last little bits, last little sort of cleanup bits before it moves into Aquarius. So just consider that if you're considering starting or doing anything new. You might just want to hold off for a bit until the energies settle here. So again, here's a timeline if you want a visual. And again, if you look at this orange line here, this is Rahu Ketu, so the nodes in the moon, they went Sunday on March 24th, so they started becoming unstable. And then on yesterday, April 12th, they shifted signs. They're going to be aspected by Saturn on April 21st. So again, Saturn is restructuring. That's going to be a little bit of, more unstable energy. And then they're going to be forming an eclipse. The nodes are going to be forming eclipse, solar eclipse in South America, mostly South America, on April 30th. And then they're going to be forming a lunar eclipse that's going to occur. Actually, there's going to be a lot of lunar eclipse energy in Europe where the Ukrainian-Russian war is happening. So, again, I don't think things are going to be quite stable there for a while. That's going to be happening middle of May on the 16th. Jupiter, again, went Sunday, started destabilizing on April 8th. It just shifted signs today into its own sign, bringing a lot of positive energy, and it's going to become more stable on April 17th once it gets out of the first degree of Pisces. And then Saturn, again, it's starting its Sunday period tomorrow, and that will last until almost the end of May. And again, it may kind of seem at the end of May like, okay, we can kind of step into this new rhythm or new paradigm, because this is going to be a new paradigm. With these 4 planets shifting, these slow planets shifting, this is going to be affecting 8 out of the 12 houses in somebody's chart. So we're all going to be experiencing a paradigm shift on some level. So the game board is changing, and the rules of the game are also going to be changing. In any case, it might feel like, okay, we're starting to get into a new flow, a new rhythm, the end of May. But Saturn's going to retrograde back again in the middle of July, back into Capricorn, do a little bit more of cleanup work before it finally moves out in January of 2023. So there you have it, a little bit of a visual to help you just know where the planets are, what's kind of going on right now. And again, I would say the major thing is that, there's going to be a lot of good energy coming, but there's still going to be, it's going to be a little bit of a roller coaster or a little bit of a wild mix-up for the next few weeks. So again, if there's anything major, long-lasting that you want to create, I probably would wait until at least the beginning of May, if not the end of May, to get started on that. All right, so there you have it. Major aspects of transits going on in April. So there you have it. Really big changes and long-lasting changes happening in April of this year, 2022. In any case, I hope you have found this information helpful, and I appreciate your time. Thank you for being here. Namaste.